All right, this is our next unit. It is on the cardiovascular system, just different parts. We've been studying blood, and now we're getting ready to study the heart and the blood vessels. So, of course, knowing some stuff about the blood already should kind of contribute to your understanding of the heart and what its functions are and how the blood vessels help the heart carry out its jobs. So today's lecture is going to focus on the heart. We are going to study anatomy as well as some physiology of the heart. We won't get to all the physiology of how the heart does its job, but we'll get to a little. So let's get started. First of all, your heart is about the size of your fist, and it weighs less than 1 pound. It's located in your chest. It's in the front or anterior part of your thoracic cavity, right behind the sternum, which is called the mediastinum. It has kind of a pointed or more narrow end to it that's at its bottom half, which is actually called its apex. So I know normally I think of apex as the peak of something, and this is kind of peaked, but it's at the bottom of the heart. And then you have the base, which is at the top of the heart. And it's kind of sitting in there a little bit diagonal. And so the apex is pointing down towards your left hip, and the base is pointing up towards your right shoulder. It has a double sac that encloses it, and this double sac is called the pericardium. And the job of the pericardium is to protect the heart. So it has this empty cavity that also produces a fluid substance, pericardial fluid, that kind of helps the heart not have friction working against it. And so it just keeps the heart functioning better. If you get inflammation in the pericardium, it's called pericarditis. And that can cause those layers of the pericardium to kind of stick to each other, and then that interferes with the ability of the heart to beat. So not a good thing. Also, if you've ever seen any of those shows where they, stab the big needle in the chest of someone and they're trying to draw blood off of the chest, what they're really doing is probably putting the needle into the pericardium so that they can remove any fluid buildup in there. It could be blood if it was a car accident and you ruptured the pericardium and you were getting blood filled in there. Obviously, if you fill that cavity up with blood, then it's going to be putting pressure on the heart and not allowing it to expand and contract when it's beating. Inside the heart itself, there are actually 3 different layers of the heart. The first layer is called the epicardium. If you break that word apart, epi means around, and cardi is heart. So this is the layer surrounding the whole heart. It's kind of connected up with the pericardium. And it produces this fluid called serous fluid. Again, it's helping keep the heart lubricated so that it doesn't have friction working against it while it's trying to beat. The major layer of the heart is called the myocardium, and myo means muscle and cardi is heart. So the myocardium is the middle layer of the heart that is actually the muscle of the heart. It's what actually does the contracting so that the heart beats. And then the final thin layer on the inside is known as the endocardium, endo meaning inside, cardi again meaning heart. So it's the thin layer on the inside, and it basically lines the chambers and also then just connects up with the blood vessels that are coming into and out of the heart. Inside the heart, there are 4 chambers. Okay, 2 chambers that are on the top half and 2 chambers that are on the bottom. And the upper chambers are called the atria. Atrium is singular. And they are a lot smaller than the lower chambers of the heart. So I know in the picture over here, it kind of makes them look, fairly big, but now you can see this is a sheep heart that we will be dissecting in a few days. And it looks very similar to a human heart. And the atria are very small up here. The ventricles take up the huge majority of the heart. And the ventricles are the bottom chambers. And so the atria are where you're going to collect blood as it enters the heart. And then the ventricles are going to distribute blood as it leaves the heart, going to distribute it out to the different vessels to go to different places in your body. And notice that one side of the heart seems really thick compared to the other side. That's the left side. And the left ventricle is really big because it has to pump blood throughout the entire body, whereas the smaller right ventricle only has to pump the blood right next door. So in the picture of a heart that's not a real heart, it does make them look more similar in size, but you can see in an actual real heart that the right side is much smaller than the left side. Also inside the heart are 4 valves. 2 of the valves are known as atrioventricular valves, or AV. If you break that word apart, atrio would be referring to the atria, and ventricular would be referring to the ventricles. So these are the 2 valves that are right between an atrium and a ventricle. And their job is to prevent blood from going back up into the atria when the ventricles are trying to contract and push the blood out of the heart. And the 2 names are the bicuspid valve, which is also known as the mitral valve, and the tricuspid valve. And the bicuspid valve is on the left side and the tricuspid valve is on the right. And sometimes people confuse those. And so the way I keep them straight is I remember tri means 3, bi means 2. And since there's more right-handed people in the world than there are left-handed, then the tricuspid valve has to be on the right side of the heart. And then the other 2 valves are called semilunar valves. Remember, we had that word on our prefix and suffix worksheet. Semi means half, lunar means moon. So they kind of look like half moons. And their job is to prevent blood from flowing back into the heart when the ventricles are relaxed, and so they're filling back up with blood. And you wouldn't want the blood to leave the heart and then come right back into it. So it makes sure the blood doesn't re-enter the ventricles after leaving the heart. So there's 2 valves called semilunar valves. One is called the pulmonary valve, and pulmonary means lung. And so this is the valve that is where the pulmonary trunk leads off of the right ventricle, and so it's going to prevent the blood from flowing back into the right ventricle. And then the other valve is the aortic valve, and it is where the left ventricle meets up with the aorta, which is the hugest or largest artery you have in your body. And so it's going to prevent blood from flowing back into the left ventricle once it's been pumped out into the aorta. Inside those valves are these little tiny white cords, which are called chordae tendineae, and they anchor the valves to the walls of the heart. And so when we dissect the sheep heart, you'll get to see those little white tiny cords. And so their job is to anchor those valves to the heart, and then when they want to close, they're able to do that because they're anchored. Sometimes the valves do get kind of leaky, they wear out, and as long as the damage isn't too great, then the heart can keep functioning. It just usually has to work a lot harder. So if the valve gets damaged enough, you're probably going to have it replaced. And one of the reasons the valves might get damaged is due to infection inside your heart, which is known as endocarditis. If the endocardium, remember that innermost layer, gets infected, it's called endocarditis. Itis meaning inflammation. And so this is inflammation inside the heart. And if you get repeated bouts of that, then the cords become stiff, the valves become stiff, and so then they won't work as well, and so then the blood isn't getting pumped out as well as it should. It kind of gets leaked back in, and so then it can eventually weaken and fail, and then you might have to have it replaced. The left and right sides of the heart are separated from each other by this thick wall known as the septum. Sometimes it's called the intraventricular septum, and then there's an atrial septum, so it's harder to see the atria division, but here's between the 2 ventricles. And the job is to separate the 2 sides of the heart, because one side of the heart is pumping oxygenated blood out to the body, and the other side is pumping deoxygenated blood to the lungs so it can get oxygen. So it's kind of like a double pump. Even though it's just one organ, it functions as a double pump. So we're going to talk more about that. So now we're kind of getting into physiology, because remember, physiology is how something works. So we just studied the anatomy of the heart. We learned all the parts, the chambers and the valves, and we'll get into studying the vessels later. But now we're going to skip over and talk about some of the physiology, or how the heart actually works. And so there are 2 different circulation loops that the blood is going to travel through. One is called the pulmonary circuit, and the other is called the systemic circuit. And if you remember, pulmonary means lung. So this is going to be the side of the heart that is going to take blood that's oxygen poor and deliver it out to the lungs so it can get oxygen, and then it'll come back to the other side of the heart. So here's your right side of your heart. Remember, you're looking at somebody's heart in their chest, so their right side is backwards from yours. So this is technically the right side of their heart, and it's going to pump it out to the lungs to get oxygen. Okay, and then it'll come back and go through the left side. So they're really interlocking loops. So this first loop if we consider that we start out in the body, we've just delivered all of the goods and we've picked up all the waste, including carbon dioxide and other waste products. Then we need to go back to the heart so that we can get oxygen by going to the lungs. So that part that you see in blue is the pulmonary circuit. The other side, the left side of the heart, is called the systemic circuit. And the systemic circuit is what is going to receive the oxygenated blood from the lungs, send it through the left side of the heart, and then send it out to the body to deliver all the oxygen as well as other nutrients to every place in the body. And it does that through the biggest artery in your body, which is called the aorta. And the biggest veins that you have in your body, one coming from the bottom half of your body and the other coming from the top half, are called the vena cava. So those are the two different loops that work to feed the oxygen-poor blood to the lungs so it can get oxygen, and then feed the oxygen-rich blood out to all the body parts. The blood contained in the heart doesn't nourish the heart muscle itself, and of course, since it's an organ, it's got tissues and cells, so it needs to have its cells fed as well. So there are what are called coronary arteries, because coronary means heart as well. So the coronary arteries branch off of this big aorta, and then they will branch out and be able to feed the heart muscle itself. And then the coronary veins will be responsible for draining the heart muscle, the myocardium, and taking that blood back into the right atrium so it can go back out through the pulmonary circuit and get oxygen again. Why is it so important to feed the heart? Well, the heart is what is feeding the rest of your body, so you got to make sure you feed it too. And a couple of issues can arise when either your heart is beating really, really rapidly, or when you have a buildup of cholesterol in your arteries, which we often call plaque. And so the myocardium isn't able to receive the blood supply like it should because the relaxation periods of the heart are just too short. So they're not able to really fill those vessels up with oxygen-rich blood and feed them out to the myocardium. And the result can be really severe chest pain known as angina pectoris, or often just shortened as angina. And it's kind of a sign that things are not good, so it shouldn't go taken care of. I mean, you should take care of it. And so angina, if it happens too long, can eventually deprive your heart of the oxygen that it needs and the nutrients that it needs, so the cells can start to die. And this is called a myocardial infarction, which is commonly known as a heart attack. So you can actually have part of your heart muscle die. As you can see here, there's a buildup of plaque in this artery right here, and so it wasn't able to feed these parts of the ventricle, and so part of the heart dies. Well, then when you're trying to use that heart to beat, that part of the heart isn't able to do it anymore. So one thing they often do is perform what's called a coronary bypass surgery, and they're going to basically bypass wherever the blockage is and use other veins in your body. A real popular one is the saphenous vein that's in your leg. It's the longest vein you have in your body, and they can cut out a section of it and then use it to bypass where the blocked area is. Okay, so here's a blocked area and here's a blocked area, and in one area they used the saphenous vein and they went from the aorta out here to the vessel so that they could deliver the oxygen-rich blood to the heart. And over here they used an artery from the mammary glands or mammary vessels, and were able to bypass as well. They went from a branch of the aorta out to the heart muscle to bypass that blockage. So if you've ever heard of somebody having like a quadruple bypass, quadruple means 4, so they had 4 different blocked areas that they had to bypass with these different veins that they took from other parts of the body. And that is your first lecture over the heart and blood vessels.